You work as a monster exterminator. 2 cases came in: a hatchling dragon and a den of werewolf pups. A Reddit writing prompt. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an adventurer like the ones you see on TV. I had posters of the adventurers from Griffin Hunter on my bedroom wall and the replica Gorgon heads from Season 2 on my shelves. But as you get older, you need to accept that we can't all be famous monster hunters. Some of us have to be a part of the real world. I was only 6 when my sword master told my parents that I'd never reach the top tier. Imagine that. 6, and already they knew I didn't have the potential to go up against a dragon, or even a kelpie. They suggested a safer profession, like blacksmith or tanner, but a life hitting bits of metal or spreading dog shit on cow skin wasn't for me. I knew I had it in me to make my living taking down dangerous magical creatures. We opened the doors at Fringly Magical Extermination at 8 a.m., but I like to arrive 20 minutes early to put the coffee on and see if any jobs had arrived overnight. Typically, the mystical portal mail arrives around 11 a.m., but if the magical transmitters have come out of alignment at the post office, then it can arrive early or occasionally even before it was sent. That had been a problem in the past when we'd turned up to a job removing demonic mice from a witch's coven, only to discover that we were a week early and they hadn't even begun the possession phase yet. Of course, that just leads to more paperwork needing to be filed with the Department of Temporal Paradoxes, and that place gives me a headache. Today, I found 2 items sitting in the in slot, the usual brown envelopes that signified a job, wrapped in red ribbon and with the seal of the sender embossed on the front. A whistle from the other room signaled my drink was ready, and so I carried them through to the main office so I could open them with some caffeine in my system. Fringly Co. was set up nearly 30 years ago and has built a reputation on the back of reliable, brutal service. If you need a possessed seal club to death, then we have enchanted clubs to do the job. If you have a vampire problem, we have the latest in rapid dispersal garlic delivery systems and of course, we offer the usual range of exorcisms and consecrations that you'd expect from a top-tier extermination company. Probably 85% of our business is corporate clients these days. Supermarkets, banks, large office buildings, they are all prone to infestations of one variety of another. But this morning's jobs were a little more interesting as they both involved private clients. I cracked the first seal, impressed by the crossed swords impressed in the wax, and scanned for the location. Pontworthy Manor, I knew it, but only by having passed by it so many times. It was a huge place on the outskirts of town, certainly more high class than anywhere I'd been on the job before. Impressed, I moved on to the actual reason for the call-out: werewolf puppies. That explained why it had come in the middle of the night. Puppy births tended to be done in private to avoid the shame of it becoming public knowledge, and a full moon like last night meant that there would be more than a few births occurring. I made a mental note to update the Facebook page to remind people we offered a full moon service and moved to the second envelope. This one had a crest I didn't recognize, a boat with a full sail. Interesting. I looked for the address first and was surprised to see it was an out-of-town job, nearly 20 miles away in a small village called Smitherby. Most jobs tended to be in town. Country folk were happy to deal with most things themselves, and so for them to have called us out meant that it would need to be a serious. My eyes fixed on the cause dragon hatchling. A dragon. Admittedly a young one, but this was all I had ever wanted since I was a boy. The idea of sending this in to be dealt with by an official adventurer didn't even cross my mind. This one was going to be mine. I gulped down my coffee and began grabbing equipment. If my boss, Mr. Johnson, got in before I was gone, that he might make me turn this over, but this one was mine. I was finally going to fight a dragon. I took both jobs. There would be more coming in with the mail, and leaving this for someone else to take could only put me deeper in the bad books. Pontworthy Manor was on the way out of town anyway, and I could swing in on the way out to the real job of the day. I took a moment in the equipment room to make my selections. The puppy job was easy, but a dragon? Even a little one would be hard to kill and could be extremely dangerous, and so I stacked the heaviest armor we had onto the little equipment trolley. I added flame retardant spray, scale melter, and the extra large nail clippers and hurried out to the truck, anxious to get loaded before I could be stopped. In the armory, I looked over my choices of weapon. Traditional was for a sword, but that was for adventurers and I was an exterminator. Traps and poison were my bread and butter. I loaded the trolley with everything I could think of and then, as a last step, I popped an enchanted sword on the top. You never knew when it might come in handy. At 8:58 a.m., I peeled out of the parking lot and turned right, down the main avenue, past the Warlock Quarter and out towards Pontworthy Manor. I clicked my phone onto silent and began to hum the theme song from Griffin Hunter. Today was going to be a good day. The main gates of the manor slowly creaked open when I had announced myself on the crackly intercom, and I drove up the long winding driveway to the main house. Once it must have been an impressive driveway, but decay had crept in and the path was studded with clumps of grass and daisies. The house had fared no better and the large structure had seen many better days. Paint peeled around the windows and a few were even boarded up, another one of the great old families in decay. How long until they were forced to abandon this place, sell it off, and join the rest of the normal folk in the city? Old money may be looked upon as more worthy than new money, but when it runs out you starve just as easily. I considered going to the tradesman entrance, but a thicket of brambles seemed to have taken over the side of the house, and so I parked in front of the stone columns and walked up to the main door and used the great brass knocker. It echoed inside the house, and for a while I wondered if anyone would answer, but at last the sound of shuffling from within moved towards the door. In my line of work, there aren't many things which can still make you feel grossed out or upset, but back when I was first starting out, I had the misfortune to have to clear out a zombie infestation at a local primary school. Nearly 3 days of crushing children's heads with a steel bar can leave some scars on a man, and this went a long way to explain the shriek I let out a little as the door opened. The butler at the doorway was indeed human, but looked worse than most zombies I had killed. Indeed, he must have been more than 100 years old, and it seemed impressive he could walk at all. Age had seemingly had its way with him, leaving him a wrinkled prune, short and stooped over, while also somehow disjointed looking, as if his elbows had stayed behind when the rest of him dropped. For a moment we both looked at each other, his milky eyes passing up and over me, sending slight chills down my spine. Yersh. His lack of teeth made the words sound mushy. It took me a moment for my brain to kick back in. Hi, hello, I'm here from the, I pointed towards the badge on my chest. You know, the exterminator guys. He smelled like peppermint and mothballs, and it was quite distracting. I began to wonder if perhaps he might be a zombie after all, but his ability to speak put lie to that. You're fear to fake fair of fee fistifress? By the intonation I could tell it was a question, but the actual words eluded my completely. I ran it back and forth in my head a few times and slowly the P's converted back to TS. Oh, yes, the mistress. I suppose so. The call was about werewolf puppies. His eyes rolled, whether for dramatic effect or simply because they had come loose was unclear, but he followed it with a long, slow nod and slowly turned. I found my hand had automatically moved to a side pocket, where it was gently clutching a small vial of holy water, and I considered for a moment sprinkling a little on his back, just to look for a reaction, but I pushed back the urge and followed. He shuffled at an infinitesimal pace, and I began to wish that the jobs paid by the hour and not results. But I had no choice but to follow. After 6 or 7 moments, we had reached halfway across the hall to the great staircase, when there was the sound of a door slamming and footsteps. A young girl raced across the landing and down the stairs, followed hotly by an older man, dark-haired and fierce. Tears flowed down her soft oval face and strands of her golden hair were stuck to her forehead. She would have been beautiful, but the crying had made her nose run and eyes red, and so instead, she was a slightly snotty mess. You can't, Papa. They're my children. They're my babies. Her father followed, stern and dressed in an immaculate, if outdated suit. I shall not have this family brought further into disgrace. That you gave yourself to that beast was bad enough, but to carry his spawn and expect it to live in this house. Never. She spun and beat her fists on his chest, but he was resolute. I coughed, a little awkwardly, and they finally looked down from the stairs to see me. The old butler seemed to notice them for the first time and began winding up his voice to introduce me, but I stepped in front and did the honors myself. Hello, my name is Dave. I'm here from Fringly Magical Extermination about the. I looked to the girl and then back to the father. The puppy issue. The father pushed the girl back and strode down the stairs, grasping my hand. Thank God you're here. Now this needs to be handled with discretion. I help up my hands. Sir, we are contractually bound to never discuss a case. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. Very well. Broomhilda, take this gentleman to see you. Take him to them. Sniffling, the girl came down the stairs and without a look or a word she left and I followed behind, hoping that she'd lead me to the job and not to a room where she could lock me in and feed me to the butler. We passed down a corridor and at last came to a door, behind which I could hear the gentle sounds of yapping. She pushed in and I followed, finding a nice plush, if faded, bedroom with a pen in the middle. 6 small puppies, looking much like Labradors, but with human legs and bottoms were running back and forth, but all ran to the front of their pen to greet us. The girl sat down and began to stroke them. Here they are, my babies. I nodded, not really wanting to engage. They're the product of my love of a great beast, Saberwolf. He is the leader of the local pack and stronger than any. I nodded again, wondering if he was a Labrador or if they'd just come out looking like that by some quirk of genetics. I began to wish her father had come in with us, as she wasn't done speaking. We met while I walked the moors, dancing through the darkness, unaware of the danger that lurked. I was spotted by a member of his pack, and they sought to eat me, but Saberwolf saved me and took me as his own. I was tired of nodding, so tried to move things along. You don't get out much among other people, do you? She shook her head and tears sprinkled on the floor. No, I have lived here all my life. My father is very controlling. I am only able to see my love when he is away, and I can slip away from our butler. I wondered how much of a challenge the butler could possibly be, but didn't want to engage again. Now he seeks to take away my children, my babies, my little ones, but you see how beautiful they are, don't you? I looked down. Half werewolves were considered a pest due to their weird feral nature and unpredictable transformations. As they went, this litter's half-wolf, half-human look made them strange-looking and not what I would have called beautiful, but it seemed she needed my affirmation. Yeah, they're okay. She smiled and her face lit up, her beauty finally shining through. I knew you would help me. Thank you, kind sir. Let me fetch a few belongings and we can escape together. You can take me to the city. And I can start a new life, a new beginning. Without waiting for an answer, she jumped to her feet and kissed me on the cheek, running from the room. Some people say that it's a straightforward job I have, but it's situations like that they simply don't see. I deal with not just pests, but people and emotions too. This girl had given her love to a man-beast who was her only outlet, and her controlling father now wished for me to dispose of the evidence? I picked up the smallest one and examined him, wondering for a moment if he'd be able to lead any kind of life, have any normality in this strange world. But as the old saying goes, he who pays the piper calls the tune, and the bill was to be settled by the father and not the daughter. I gathered up the puppy babies and popped them into a strong flaxen sack I had brought. Working my way back to the front of the house, I wondered if the butler would be able to show me if they had a hose, but it seemed like more trouble than it is worth, and so I went straight to my van. Typically, the barrel of holy water is used for mass infestations of vampires, demon spawn, or other such cases where a spray gun and a prayer is your best defense, but in this case it worked just as well to drown the sack of unholy offspring I had brought out with me. I considered returning to the house to leave a copy of the invoice, but the second work order sat invitingly on the passenger seat, and I decided that I could send the invoice on later. Probably best to get away before the girl returned anyway. Heading back down the drive, I wondered if the girl would keep up with this Saberwolf character, and if she might be able to let me know where his pack lived. Always handy to know if I wanted to claim some scalps on my off time for a little more money. For now, though, I had a job, and I was already running late. I slowly made my way out of the outskirts of the city, following the enchanted map towards Smitherby. I'd rarely been out this way into the countryside. I'd been brought up in the city, and so much nature had always seemed a little superfluous. In the fields, there were small herds of unicorns, grazing alongside alpacas. My idea of nature were the fire rats that you got near the docks or the .44 caliber bookworms that infested libraries. Good, honest city animals that could be exterminated, not like these country animals. Still, out here was where the real challenges were: griffins, sea serpents, and of course, dragons. In the city, the only dragons you got were the tamed ones that roasted marshmallows or chestnuts for pennies. Sad, stunted-looking creatures with clipped wings and sad eyes, not like the beast he had dreamed of facing. A wild dragon was still an event out here, slipping between dimensions and terrorizing a whole swathe of the land, until an adventurer arrived anyway. Of course, good adventurers were few and far between, and when they took a while to get round to killing a wild dragon, it gave them a chance to lay eggs, which is likely where this hatchling had come from. A dragon born on this plane of existence was not quite as impressive as a wild dragon that had slipped in from a magical dimension, but much stronger than the tame beasts, who had the size and fight bred out of them. The excitement was building with every mile he closed to the target, and the question remained: why had they contacted an extermination company and not an adventurer? The question buzzed around my head as I drove, but it was largely pushed aside by my growing excitement. By the time I arrived at the small village, I had almost convinced myself I was an adventurer, about to face a fully grown beast, but it was hard to feel noble when driving a van that smelled of poison and drowned puppies. I found my way to the address, a small cottage on the outskirts of this little gray village, and with some trepidation knocked. The woman who opened seemed to define the term formidable, dressed in tweed and thick wool. She seemed to fill the doorway with an impressive bosom that she peered over sternly. She didn't give me a moment to speak before snapping. Well, I tried to summon my wits about me, but it was difficult to maintain my composure in the face of such confident dismissal. Her hand whipped out and a finger jabbed at my chest. Yes, you're from the pest control company. Finally, something I could hold on to. Yes, I was rather louder than intended, but she didn't seem to mind. Instead, she grabbed the front of my overalls and I was yanked into the house, nearly tripping and falling, but instead stumbling after her clumsily. She pulled me on and I found myself propelled through several rooms that I saw at high speed. The impression of wool, tweed, and small brass ornaments was blurred past my eyes until we came to the rear of the house and then stopped by a door that had a chair under the handle. Well, here it is. Get to work. I eyed the door and she tapped her foot impatiently. What are you waiting for? Finally, I found my voice and a small degree of composure. Well, I'll need to get some equipment from my van to be able to kill it. I offered a weak smile that slowly faded as I watched her expression turn from irritation to horror. Which is why you contacted us. Her hand moved faster than I could follow, and the next thing I knew, I was looking at the wall to my left, my cheek stinging as it processed the slap that I'd received. I looked back and her face was flushed, eyes wide. You monster. I rubbed at my cheek confused. What was that for? She fumed. I don't want it killed. I called you so that it could be dealt with humanely. She didn't want it dead. I tried to conceive of what it meant to humanely deal with a wild creature that enjoyed roasting people alive and would be 60 feet long in the next 2 days. So, what do? You want me to do then? Her eyes shone with anger still, but I could see that this part of the plan was poorly thought out and doubt was creeping in. Couldn't you rehome it? She finished lamely. A crash came from behind the door and both our eyes went to it. How big did you say it was when you found it? She looked less certain still. I actually found the egg and brought it home to hatch it. It was only 4 or 5 inches long last night, but this morning, a couple of feet long? Dragons grew at tremendous speed. By now it would likely be the size of a large dog. I suppose. She muttered unhappily. The anger came back. Your website says no job too big, so get in there and sort it out. I smiled. But no killing. The smile went again. 20 minutes later, and I was ready. Dressed in my heaviest protective gear, I actually looked not dissimilar to an adventurer, and whilst I had left the sword behind, I'd brought along a large muzzle and loop on a stick, hoping could at least get this dragon out of the house. A small part of me wondered if I could actually find a way to keep it restrained and deal with it humanely after all. Certainly, it'd be a bit of a coup, and although I wouldn't be a dragon killer per se, it would look good on the local news. Taking a deep breath, I nodded, and she drew away the chair, and I opened the door. The dragon turned, and for a moment, I was lost in its green/gold eyes, but they narrowed and it hissed at me, breaking the spell. It was already around 4 feet long and was stretching out its great waxy wings almost, filling the small room that had once been a pantry of sorts. Its scales shimmered with an iridescent glow, and it was hard not to feel awed. It hissed again and belched a small gob of fire, which fell lazily to the ground. Somewhere in its instinct, it knew that a heavily armored man was trouble, and it was worried. It wanted out. With a flap, it half rose in the air, and I stumbled back, but before I could move forward with my rope in a loop, it charged, not at me, but at the wall to the side. With a splintering crash of masonry, it broke free and light flooded into the room. It glanced back as it retreated, and then it was gone. "Well, you were bloody useless," came the voice from behind me. It didn't take long for word to get out, and by mid-afternoon a dozen or so adventurers had arrived and were firing streams of arrows into the air at the dragon. I sat with the homeowner, Mrs. Forthwick, and we watched, sadly as it spun unhappily in the air, eventually sinking to the ground where the adventurers fought to charge it with their white stallions and swords. I didn't want this. I just wanted to help the poor bugger go somewhere safe for it. She sipped her tea and I nodded in agreement. It took a little time and one of the adventurers got roasted alive, but over the next 30 minutes we watched as they took down and finally killed the young dragon, turning away at the last, too sickened to watch. At last I returned to my van, the excitement of the morning long gone, filled with a hollow regret that I had not been able to change what had happened. With tears in my eyes, I filled in the invoice for my time and slipped it through her letterbox before turning the van and heading for home.